The story you are about to hear is one of the most tragic in the chronicles of European royalty. It is not only the tale of a woman betrayed by her husband and condemned by her family. It is the story of a queen who lived her death while still breathing, locked away for more than 3 decades until her name was nearly erased from memory. Imagine the beginning. The bells of Hanover rang, the torches burned bright, and the people rejoiced at the sight of a dazzling young bride. Sophia Dorothea walked down the aisle in shimmering silk, her beauty unmatched, her presence radiant. The daughter of Celle was believed to be stepping into glory. Yet even on that very day, the shadow of her fate had already begun to close around her. Her husband, George Louis, stood at her side with the coldness of stone. His eyes revealed no affection. His touch carried no tenderness. He saw her not as a partner, but as a pawn to strengthen his claim to power. As the crowd raised their voices in cheer, she felt the silence of despair rising within her. She knew she was being delivered not into a marriage, but into a prison built of gold and guarded by ambition. The tragedy that followed would become one of the most haunting chapters in royal history. A forbidden love, a disappearance in the dark, and finally, a punishment more cruel than death itself. Sophia Dorothea would not be executed by sword or fire. She would be buried alive in the silence of Alden Castle, condemned to fade until even her children were forced to forget her. This is not simply a story of one woman. It is a story of how power devours those who stand in its way. Stay with me until the end, and you will see why her name still whispers through the ruins of history. And if you wish to uncover more of these hidden tragedies, subscribe now and walk with us into the shadows of the past. Sophia Dorothea was not born to be a shadow at the edge of a throne. From the earliest days of her youth in Celle, she radiated a vitality that startled those who surrounded her. Courtiers whispered that her beauty was dazzling, but it was more than beauty that set her apart. Her eyes burned with curiosity. Her laughter carried through the gardens, and her movements seemed always too free for the narrow expectations of her rank. In an age when women of noble blood were expected to lower their eyes and exist only as ornaments to men, Sophia Dorothea refused to be merely decorative. She wanted to live, to feel, to love. At court, her presence was like a flame that warmed some and unsettled others. While other young women sat quietly embroidering, she was riding with daring speed, challenging the rules that pressed upon her. To her family, this rebellious spark was both enchanting and dangerous. They loved her charm but feared what would happen if her spirit was not controlled. For a princess was not meant to dream of freedom. A princess was meant to serve as currency in the great game of alliances. It was during these youthful years that she first encountered Philip Christoph von Königsmarck. He was everything her world seemed to forbid. Tall, striking, with the easy grace of a soldier who had seen both battlefields and ballrooms. He carried the scent of adventure wherever he went. Their eyes met in the bustle of court, and for a fleeting moment, she glimpsed something that felt like recognition. Not words, not promises, only the quiet knowledge that here was someone who could see her as more than a daughter to be married off. The feelings that stirred between them never dared to step into the open. A glance, a half smile, a silence that said more than conversation ever could. In those unspoken moments, Sophia Dorothea felt alive in a way that frightened her. She kept those feelings hidden, like a secret flame cupped in trembling hands. For she knew that one day soon, her fate would not be hers to choose. That day arrived when she was told she would marry George Louis, heir of Hanover. The arrangement was perfect on paper. It united fortunes, strengthened power, and promised her family influence at the highest levels. But for Sophia Dorothea, it was a blow that struck to the heart. George Louis was not a man of warmth or passion. His reputation was one of coldness, his personality stiff, his interests limited to power and control. He was, in every way, the opposite of what she longed for. On the morning of her wedding, she wore a gown heavy with jewels, every stitch a reminder of duty. As she walked toward the altar, the air smelled of roses and smoke, yet inside she felt nothing but dread. George Louis barely looked at her. His lips pressed against hers in a kiss that felt more like a formality than a bond. Where she had once dreamed of a union of souls, she now found herself chained to a man who seemed incapable of love. At the banquet that followed, the halls of Hanover glowed with music and laughter. Guests toasted to the future of the couple, but the bride sat in silence, her smile fixed like a mask. Inside, she was already mourning. Königsmarck's image haunted her thoughts, not as a lover lost, but as a possibility denied. She realized with brutal clarity that the flame she had guarded would now be smothered. That night, she entered her new home, a palace that to the world symbolized triumph, but to her felt like a prison. The walls were gilded, the corridors vast, yet every step she took echoed with loneliness. George Louis treated her not as a woman to be cherished, but as property acquired. The marriage bed was cold, the chambers grand but hollow. Yet somewhere in the quiet of her heart, the small flame refused to die. Sophia Dorothea would try to live, to find purpose, even inside this cage of gold. And that hidden fire, though nearly extinguished, would one day ignite again when fate brought Königsmarck back into her life. The first years of marriage drained Sophia Dorothea of the color that once made her the brightest presence in Celle. Hanover's court was cold, not only in stone but in spirit. George Louis spent his nights with women who knew how to flatter his vanity, women who laughed loudly and whispered promises of loyalty. The most powerful among them was Melusine von der Schulenburg, tall, sharp, and patient. Her influence grew like ivy along the palace walls, climbing higher every day. For Sophia Dorothea, this meant humiliation served openly before the entire court. She was the official wife, yet her husband paraded Melusine without shame. In one gathering, when music filled the air and goblets were raised, Melusine leaned close to the princess and spoke softly so that only she could hear. "You will learn that here affection is for the chosen, not the promised," she said. Those words cut deeper than any public insult. Sophia Dorothea's smile froze. Her hands tightened against the silk of her gown, but her eyes remained dry. She refused to give her enemy the pleasure of seeing her break. George Louis, meanwhile, found his own amusement in pressing her into silence. He ignored her laughter, corrected her in public, and treated her as though she were a child in need of discipline. It became clear that his pleasure was not in love, but in grinding down her spirit until it would no longer resist. Yet Sophia Dorothea clung to small acts of defiance. She began to pour her energy into helping the poor of Hanover. Servants carried baskets of food, garments, and coins at her order. Mothers with hungry children blessed her name. These deeds did not change the court, but they kept her heart alive, proof that she had not been extinguished. In time, these quiet acts became whispers of another kind. Long after her enemies sought to erase her, people would still recall the kindness of a princess who remembered those beneath the marble floors. It was in this shadowed life that fate returned Philipp Christoph von Königsmarck to Hanover. Years had changed him from a young officer into a seasoned figure with the air of distant campaigns and foreign courts upon him. The moment Sophia Dorothea saw him again, the silence inside her cracked. His presence reminded her of the girl she had once been, the one who longed for freedom and dared to laugh too loudly. Their reunion was careful at first, nothing more than brief conversations. But behind every word, there was a trembling urgency. In the gardens, under the cover of hedges, he whispered only once. "I thought time might have stolen you from me," he said. She lowered her eyes, afraid to let them shine with what she felt. "Time has stolen much, but not everything," she answered. From that moment, their secret began. Letters passed in hidden ways, words written with trembling hands that spoke of love denied and lives stolen. They met when they could, behind curtains of night or in silent corridors. Each glance in public carried a danger, yet it carried a thrill as well. For in those stolen seconds, she was alive again. Not everyone at court was blind. Baron von Knesebeck, an officer who had long served the Hanover family, wrote in a letter preserved through history that whispers of their closeness reached the ears of many. He noted that the princess appeared to shine again, her face no longer shadowed as before. She looked as if light had returned to her. He recorded. Those words, meant as an observation, became testimony of a love that burned too brightly to stay hidden. The flame that united them grew, even as the walls around them closed in. With each letter, each touch, the danger thickened like storm clouds. Sophia Dorothea felt it, yet she could not let go. After years of humiliation and silence, she had found her heart again, and it beat for Königsmarck. Secrets do not survive long inside a palace. Whispers carry faster than wind when gold and favor are the reward. The tender glances between Sophia Dorothea and Königsmarck, the hurried notes that passed from hand to hand, soon became subjects of speculation. In the corridors of Hanover, every servant and every soldier could be bought, and what began as rumor soon reached ears that should never have heard it. Melusine von der Schulenburg was the first to seize upon it, always near George Louis, always listening with her sharp, unblinking eyes. She found satisfaction in the smallest hint of scandal. Watching Sophia Dorothea walk with a renewed glow, she saw not joy but an opportunity to destroy the woman she envied. She only needed patience. It was not long before George Louis himself was alerted. He showed no outward fury, yet those who knew him feared the silence that followed. His mother, Sophia of Hanover, added her own cold judgment, declaring that the family must not suffer humiliation. From then on, the lovers were trapped in a web they could no longer escape. The letters that once carried promises of love became desperate. Königsmarck urged her to flee with him. Sophia Dorothea hesitated, knowing what failure would mean. Yet the thought of living forever in a cage gnawed at her. They began to whisper of flight, of horses waiting beyond the city, of a dawn where they would be free. But even these dreams were overheard. Melusine moved carefully, playing her part as confidant of George Louis. She set the final trap with a cruel elegance. A letter was forged, imitating the hand of Sophia Dorothea, inviting Königsmarck to a secret meeting in the quiet halls of Herrenhausen. He believed it to be their moment of escape. That night in July 1694, Königsmarck walked toward his fate with hope alive in his chest. The palace was hushed, its windows glowing faintly with candlelight. He carried no weapon, only the belief that Sophia Dorothea waited for him. What he met instead were men in the shadows. Blades flashed and his struggle ended quickly, swallowed by silence. His body was hidden, his name struck from the living. Inside her chambers, Sophia Dorothea waited. Every heartbeat was heavy. Every sound in the corridor made her rise with expectation. But the door never opened. Morning arrived with cruel clarity. Königsmarck did not come. She felt the truth before anyone told her. Baron von Knesebeck, who served the Hanoverian court, left behind an account of that night. He wrote that guards had been seen moving in haste, their boots stained as if from some dark labor. He dared not write the name of Königsmarck, but his silence was as telling as confession. When Sophia Dorothea was finally confronted with her supposed betrayal, she stood in the chamber surrounded by cold faces. One courtier leaned close and whispered, "Love is not allowed here. Princess, only obedience." Those words, brief and cutting, told her everything. The man she loved was gone, and she was already condemned. Her world had collapsed in a single night. Königsmarck was lost forever. His body vanished into the shadows of Herrenhausen, and she was left with the certainty that she would be next. After the night Königsmarck vanished, Sophia Dorothea understood that the blade had cut deeper than her heart. It had carved her fate. The palace no longer whispered of scandal. It prepared for her erasure. George Louis moved with a chilling calm. He did not shout. He did not rage. He simply arranged the details that would silence his wife forever. For him, the humiliation could not be endured, not when the throne of England stood within reach. She was declared guilty of conspiring to flee and of dishonoring the House of Hanover. There was no trial, no voice allowed to defend her. One morning she was escorted out of the palace, not as a princess, but as a prisoner. The carriage wheels sank into the mud of the road as she was taken to Alden Castle, a place chosen not for grandeur, but for its walls. From the first day, the punishment was not of iron chains, but of countless small cruelties. Her letters were collected and locked away. Requests to see her children were denied without explanation. When garments were delivered, they looked noble at first glance, but the fabric was rough, the seams pulled, the size slightly wrong. When meals arrived, the plates were filled, yet the food was always cold. It was enough to sustain life, but never enough to comfort. Every detail was designed to remind her of what she had lost. The bright halls of Hanover were replaced with stone corridors that dripped in winter. The songs of banquets gave way to the caw of crows circling the fields, and silence settled in her rooms like a second jailer. Count von Platen, one of the men whose name would forever be linked to the death of Königsmarck, visited Alden briefly. His record remains in fragments, but it confirms the cruelty of her treatment. He wrote that the princess sat by the window with her hands folded, staring into the rain. When he entered, she did not rise. Only once did she speak. "You have taken everything," she said. No answer was given. The silence itself was an admission. As years passed, Sophia Dorothea began to write letters in secret, not to send them but to preserve the voice that others tried to bury. In them she poured her sorrow, her longing for her children, her memories of Königsmarck. Most were confiscated. Some were burned, but a few survived. They reveal a woman who fought to remain human even while treated as less than a shadow. In Alden, she became both alive and dead, a soul maintained only to suffer. Servants walked past her without speaking. Guards changed at their posts without looking at her. The world was instructed to behave as if she no longer existed. The cruelty was not in sudden violence, but in the drip of days that ground her spirit down. She was fed, but not nourished, dressed, but not adorned, alive, but not living. Each night the wind pressed against the shutters and she listened, hoping for some sound that would prove she had not been forgotten. And yet the world outside continued without her. Her children grew. Her husband claimed power. She remained in the silence of Alden, her voice confined to pages that were never delivered. Her life reduced to a lesson in how thoroughly a person could be erased. Years gathered in Alden, and the room around Sophia Dorothea seemed to shrink with every winter. The lime on the walls dulled. The light through the narrow window softened until afternoons looked like dawn. Her hair silvered, her breath shortened on cold mornings, and a gentle tremor began to live in her hands. She moved with care, as if each step might bruise the quiet. Beyond the heath, the world turned without her. She heard in fragments that George Lewis wore a crown far across the sea. The news arrived like a chill under a door. She did not weep. She folded the knowledge and placed it beside the other things she could not change. What remained in her was a single hope for the child who had once slept against her shoulder. He walked palaces as an heir. He learned the language of councils and armies. Perhaps one day he would remember the warmth of a mother's voice. No messenger came. No seal was broken in her name. She understood that silence had been chosen for her and also taught to him. Night after night, she sat by the window and watched the field mist rise from the river flats. When the chaplain visited, he read softly and left space for her thoughts. Once he found her tracing the glass with one finger, as if drawing a road. He whispered that God remembers every name. She answered with a tired smile, "I will keep speaking mine until someone else dares." Illness grew and receded like a tide. Some days she walked the length of the chamber and felt almost strong. Some days she could not lift a book. She began to store small proofs of herself. A pressed sprig of heather between pages. A scrap of linen with 3 careful stitches. A line of prayer written in a hand that wavered but did not break. In London, the court watched the heir and took measure of his nature. The writer Horace Walpole would later record that storms of temper shook that court in ways that policy could not explain. He did not name the wound. Yet the shape of it is clear to anyone who stands in this room and listens to its silence. A son who could not speak his mother's name carried that silence like iron. Her daughter lived within another palace and another design. Ceremonies passed. Portraits were painted. Nowhere was a mother mentioned. The success of a dynasty required that an absence be polished until it shone like virtue. Sophia Dorothea's final year was gentle and thin. Spring brought low birds over the meadow, and she smiled to hear them. Summer warmed the stones, and she slept in the shade. When autumn came, the chaplain held her hand while she rested. She spoke rarely, and only to ask him to open the window. The air smelled of wet earth and leaves. She died in 1726 with a candle burning low, and the room very still. There were footsteps in the corridor, and then quiet again. No anthem rose. No court went into mourning. She left the world as softly as a breath leaves a mirror. The next year, London crowned her son as George II. Trumpets filled the avenues, and the river flashed with oars. He did not summon her story into the light. He kept the lesson he had been given and guarded the lineage that had cost him a mother. The cheers rolled over the city while Alden held its hush. The window remains. The meadow mists return each dusk. If you listen, the room still keeps the sound of a woman repeating her name to the evening air so that time would not carry it away. When the doors of Alden closed for the last time on Sophia Dorothea, the court gave no public notice. No bells rang in her memory. Her death was folded into silence, as though a life of 30 years in confinement had ended with nothing more than another line struck from the record. The family she had married into had achieved what it wanted. They had buried her twice, once in the castle walls and once in the book of names. But the people beyond the palaces remembered something different. In the years before her fall, she had given bread to the hungry and blankets to the poor. She had ordered garments for children who had none and sent healers to villages that could not pay for care. She had gone herself into kitchens and stables, speaking with those whom the court considered invisible. These deeds were not written in chronicles, yet they remained alive in memory. To the great houses, she was a scandal. To the people, she was kindness in human form. After her death, those memories gathered strength. Widows spoke of a coin pressed into their hands. Old men recalled her visits when they lay sick. Mothers told children that a princess had once remembered them. In these stories, her name survived the silence that kings had tried to impose. Power could erase her from ceremony, but it could not erase her from gratitude. Over time, her life began to take on the weight of symbol. She was no longer only the wife betrayed and the queen erased. She became the image of love destroyed by calculation, of a woman crushed by politics, yet still capable of leaving behind light. Her tragedy was real, but so too was her compassion. In the balance between cruelty and mercy, it was mercy that endured. Alden Castle still stands, its windows dark, its stones heavy with damp. Travelers speak of the mist that clings to its towers and of the silence that seems deeper than ordinary silence. Some say the quiet is haunted not by a ghost, but by the memory of a heart that refused to be forgotten. Where power sought to erase, memory continues to breathe. Sophia Dorothea remains a warning. She shows what happens when ambition devours family and when fear chooses silence over truth. Yet she is also a reminder that no prison can completely extinguish a flame lit by kindness. The court may have denied her a place in its pageants, but the poor gave her a place in prayer. Look upon Alden in the mist and hear the echo of her endurance. Hers is the story of a heart that was chained but not erased. If you have stayed with this tale until the end, let it live with you. Keep her name alive by sharing it, and join us in uncovering the hidden tragedies that history tried to bury. Subscribe now, so that no voice as fragile and as defiant as hers will ever be silenced again.